As a result of Tyndale's translation, proverbs and visions from the Hebrew scripture became integral parts of English culture. All this was done in Antwerp, a foreign city far away from Tyndale's native Gloucestershire. Even though he was protected to some extent, he was nonetheless permanently at risk. And meanwhile, the vicious, swirling politics of Tudor England began to have repercussions for Tyndale's mission. Across the water in England, King Henry was trying to have his marriage annulled, and that was causing one or two rather pressing political problems. A lot of people on both sides of the argument would die before the matter was properly resolved. For Tyndale, holed up here in Antwerp, it was difficult to predict exactly what would happen. For while his persecutor Thomas More continued a campaign against him, there were some reformers working in the government who thought that Tyndale could be useful to them. And so we enter the twilight world of espionage. Tyndale got a message that a man called Stephen Vaughan was looking for him. Vaughan claimed to have been sent by one of the king's senior officials, Thomas Cromwell. And he had. Despite his position, Cromwell was a convinced reformer, and he wanted Tyndale in England. It had been 7 years since Tyndale last saw his native land. He had seen how a reformer's church could work out in the open in Germany, and how a Bible in the native tongue could be printed, distributed, taught, and read legally and openly. Was it possible that King Henry could be persuaded, like the Elector of Saxony who had protected Luther? Was this Tyndale's moment? Tyndale agreed to meet the agent Vaughan, but not in Antwerp itself. That was too dangerous. The rendezvous took place in a field outside the city walls. Tyndale had a single condition.
If the king would only allow bare text of scripture to be put forward as among the subjects of the emperor here, I would never write a word more. I would immediately throw myself at the feet of the king. Till then, I will endure all roughness of fortune.
The message was relayed, but back in England, the offer was withdrawn. Tyndale's ideas, it seems, were just too dangerous. He was condemned to further exile. So Tyndale remained in Antwerp, continuing his translation of the Old Testament. And there was always the risk of betrayal and death at the stake. As he worked, the political merry-go-round continued. It was a dramatic time for England. The Pope wouldn't annul Henry VIII's marriage, so King Henry renounced all papal authority and made himself the supreme head of the Church in England. Thomas More was imprisoned, Anne Boleyn became queen, and Thomas Cromwell, the counsellor most sympathetic to reform, who had sent Vaughan to Tyndale, ruled the roost at court. Seen from Catholic Antwerp, this must have looked to Tyndale like the beginning of the New Jerusalem. And yet things were not quite as they seemed. Henry VIII believed that control of the Church of England had been given to him through the office of divine providence. But theologically he was still at this point something of a traditionalist. He had no time for Protestant ideas. And the reformers had a lot of powerful enemies, some of them very rich indeed. Sometime in the spring of 1535, a young Englishman called Henry Phillips arrived in Antwerp. He had good contacts with the English community. Eventually he was introduced to Tyndale, and they became friends. On the 21st of May, the called to take Tyndale out to dinner.
He inveigled his way into Tyndale's interest. He pretended a great interest in the details of translating the Bible. Clearly he'd been offered a very large amount of money if he could catch this arch heretic who was corrupting England.
It was for money.
Oh, absolutely, yes. He was a horrible man, was Phillips.
Well, I go forth this night to dinner, and you shall go with me and be my guest.
After 12 years on the run, Tyndale's enemies had caught him at last. To this day, no one knows who paid Phillips to betray the heretic translator. But now he was arrested, his influential friends could do nothing for him. Tyndale was delivered to the officials of the Catholic, Holy Roman Emperor. Tyndale was taken from Antwerp to a castle near Brussels. He was in solitary confinement for more than a year, without even his beloved Bible.
From that moment, I think he's the man with the greatest command of the English language. After Shakespeare never heard English spoken for 500 days. It'd be Flemish or Latin. 500 days without light, without books, without anything.
There was never any real doubt about his fate. In October 1536, he faced his final ordeal. It was a fate which had threatened him all his adult life, yet even now his conviction was undimmed. To the last, his aim was to bring the Bible to the English people.
Lord, open the King of England's eyes!
Tyndale was to have been spared the horror of burning by being strangled beforehand. But it was a botched job. As the flames rose around him, he regained consciousness.
I don't think it would have been possible to have the Church of England as we know it without Tyndale. Tyndale, in his translation of the Bible, shows you can have an English language that is earthy, very accessible, very, very vivid, located in this place for these people. Tyndale magnificently, triumphantly demonstrates that it can be done.
Incredibly, only a few months after Tyndale had been murdered, the English people finally got the Bible he'd been convinced they must have. A terrible irony for Tyndale, a career spent often in hiding, dogged by persecution and vilification, to have missed by so short a period of time the realization of his ambitions. And it was a brave and politically astute churchman who finally ensured that Tyndale's work must reach the masses. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and his name was Thomas Cranmer. Cranmer's actions would transform Christianity, not only in England, but across the globe, forever.